All right, welcome everyone. We are just giving people time to join. All right, the numbers are ticking up. And welcome everyone. We are going to start in just a minute, knowing that it's a lunch break. People might be still joining in. We'll give it a couple more minutes before we start, but we also appreciate everyone's time in the middle of a busy week. And hello, all the familiar names. I'm scrolling through the attendees list right now. Really delighted to see everyone back, and a couple of new names. Obviously, Rob Cross is a legend by now in the collaboration space, and I know, Rob, you're too humble to say it yourself, but I'm going to get started. I'm Anna Tavis, Department Chair for Human Capital Management Programs at NYU School of Professional Studies. I see some of our students joining. Please know that this is a series of conversations through the academic year with thought leaders, authors, and leading practitioners in the field of people management in a much broader kind of with from the broader perspective point of view. And Rob Cross is returning to us with yet another book. Rob was the presenter on his earlier publication that did extremely well, Beyond Collaboration Overload, a very urgent and important topic to discuss. And today, Rob is going to talk to us about the microstress effect. And what I really want us to focus on, it's not just the results, but also the method. And the method here is Rob is an expert and has always been in collaboration. He is not only an academic, he's got a position with Babson College, a professor of global leadership. But really what Rob is known for is the thought leadership and really practice innovation in the space of collaboration. And Rob, when I looked at your extensive resume, your extensive CV, the number of articles that you produced, as well as books and book chapters and research, most of them are in collaboration with others. And I think that that's the recipe to productivity, to energy and motivation in work, is when you work with others. And that's what I think, for me personally, makes you really different and stand out in our field as well. Just a couple of words about my own personal work with Rob. Rob, I don't know if you remember, but I was one of the very first members of your Connected Commons, what it was, the community. I remember going to the University of Virginia. Right. And at that point, you had, on the technology side, you had people from Harvard, like really PhD computer scientists, helping you figure out, all of the technology underlying the work that you're doing. But I know that technology has become a lot more user-friendly. And now that really extends beyond just a really highly skilled specialist to a lot of us in the field of people management and people analytics specifically, to be using those tools in our day-to-day practice. But without further ado, I would like to invite you to kick us off and talk about your book and your research. And I would like to invite all the attendees here in the room to submit your questions in the chat, and we will have plenty of time to discuss what's on your mind and how it all connects to what Rob has to share with us. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
All right, good deal. Well, thank you. I wish, well, we do have it recorded, right? We captured that introduction, so I can share it with my children. I always tell them I do important things and I get nothing but eye rolls, in that. So maybe they'll listen to somebody else. But it's a huge pleasure to be here and to share ideas with this group again. And as Anna was saying, my emphasis, I'm always the boy with the hammer, right? I look at everything as networks or relationships, and have applied that to a whole suite of different issues, right? With the consortia that I direct, whether it be looking at culture differently or how teams are working differently, or in this case, really focused on understanding the relational drivers of well-being in this book that came to be called The Microstress Effect. And I say came to be called because this was a book I never wanted to write. I was, the inception of this one started about 5 or 6 years ago. I was presenting at one of my meetings for my consortia. There's a couple hundred companies in the room, and we've done a huge amount of work using network analytics to then relate and quantify statistically what high performers across a lot of organizations were doing, right? So we'd get the collective collaborative patterns, understand what was happening in these networks, and I'd get separate performance data from the organizations, and we were quantitatively modeling what more successful people were doing. And it was never a big network. It almost always boiled down to a lot more nuance behind the scenes. But one of the things we learned is the most successful people, they weren't distinguished by the size of their network, but typically by the efficiency of it, right? And they were buying back about a day a week of time compared to others, and they used that time differently. And so that book got titled Beyond Collaboration Overload, right? To really see, I interviewed 600 of those people, the exemplars, to see what are you doing that's enabling you to pull this off. And loved the work, right? It was about high performers and what people can do to replicate these practices, presenting at a group of 200 companies. And somebody kind of in the back of the room raised their hand and said, well, performance is great, but what about those people that are just happier in their lives, right? Or, they're scoring higher on measures of thriving or resilience or psychological well-being or things like that. And put yourself back 5 or 6 years ago, because I remember visibly that I groaned inwardly. I didn't show it, outside, because I always followed the direction of the consortia and kind of where they want to go. And at the time, all that everybody was talking about was innovation and organic innovation from networks. And so that was where I'd kind of, had a head of steam towards. But as I got into the interviews, I said, okay, we'll focus on relational drivers of well-being. And as I got into doing 600 of these, 300 women, 300 men, what would always happen is the first 10 minutes of every discussion, life was rainbows and lollipops. Everything was great. My children in the right place. I'm wildly successful. Look at what I have. And then minute 30, the cracks start to come in. And minute 45 and 75, you get a real sense deeply of how people are struggling. And it got into my soul. Right, the degree to which connections today and cause stress in different ways, but are also the antidote to stress, right, in different ways. So this got titled The Microstress Effect because that's always, the publisher always looking for a viral term like psychological safety or something that'll, go viral. But it fundamentally was really about how do we look at the way relationships in people's professional and personal lives affect well-being, and can we see it differently than just the relationships and understand the interactions that are happening in those relationships. And, in parallel, as I was doing this work, I started looking at all the other, kind of popular press work and books that were coming out about the role of connections, right, in people's happiness. And there's hundreds of studies on this. I'm just going to grab a few of the more prominent books on this. But Gallup came out describing how affective engagement negative experience was going down, not just through COVID, but it's really starting about 12 years ago, right? It's starting and coinciding a lot with how the timing of when organizations moved to agile, they moved to more delayered structures, they've adopted the technologies, and the stress that people feel is shot up because of this always on hyper-connected world. And what they were showing was the lack of authentic connections that's falling out of people's lives because of how busy we are. And what I was showing is it's also the volume, right, of connections that we're keeping up with. Same time, Vivek Murthy, he was the past Surgeon General, now current Surgeon General, again, wrote the book Alone, Together, I'm sorry. And, what he was showing was what he called the loneliness, epidemic. And what that boiled down to is if you don't have people that you can talk to about difficult challenges, right, in your life, which about 1 in 3 Americans do, the statistics globally are different depending on the culture, the impact is phenomenal. The mortality rate is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, 26% greater likelihood of dying early, greater factor than obesity, excess alcohol. When you look at not just the studies that he was citing, but I went and looked at the studies those studies were citing. And it just hit me, after a while of looking at all this, why don't we pay more attention to the quality of our connections? Why aren't we more intentional, not Machiavellian, but more intentional about kind of the quality of the connections we're having and the exchanges that we're having in them, given this impact, right? We will chase cholesterol medications, blood pressure medications down to the end of the earth, and yet we'll ignore something that has the equivalent impact. And a lot of it comes down to measure, right? We're used to managing in our lives what we can measure and see. And as it kept going with this, we looked into Nicholas and James' work, which I'd known for some times, about how health moves through networks, right? They use the Framingham Heart Study and others to show that the risk of heart attacks, right, are much greater if you know somebody that's had one. And of course, it's not the heart attack that's moving through or the obesity that's moving through. It's the behaviors that transmit through the networks that you're more likely to adapt what somebody around you is doing. But an interesting little side note with them is they found that you're 52% more likely to be lonely if you have a lonely connection in your life, and yet only 15% more likely to be happy if you have a happy person in your life. And so I want you to hold on to that ratio, for a little bit, typically 3 to 5, impact of negatives to positives in this. And then the most recent book that's getting a lot of attention is The Good Life. And they, of course, studied, Harvard students or Boston, inner city students, and for 80 years, I believe it is, right? And they showed up at their homes. They did MRIs on them as the technologies evolved, blood samples, everything. So wildly studied population, right? And some of their key premises is the quality of people's connections in their 50s matters more than cholesterol in their 80s, right? For kind of being healthy, right, and happy. And so between these bodies of work, right, my own personal experience with all these people, I'm having conversations with 600 people that you probably only have with 4 or 5 people in your life, and then seeing the empirical evidence around this as well as what we were generating, it really got me focused on what do you do about this, right? And the problem with most of the prescriptions from these books is they would come back and say you need 2 best friends, right? Or you need a little bit more family time or things that are just about the quality of a couple connections. And that's really true, right? It shows out in the work. But the problem is, one study showed that it takes 200 hours to move somebody from a casual acquaintance to a best friend status, right? And whether it's 200, 100, 150, whatever it is, that's a lot of time, right? And most people don't have that time to go find a new best friend. And then you got to get lucky and pick the person that's going to give you their time to kind of move to that status. And it's not as feasible today, right? And the way the world is shifting so dynamically in terms of people moving in and out of groups more rapidly, in and out of organizations more rapidly. And so what I honed in on was saying, let's look at not the relationship, but let's look at what are the interactions happening in the relationships that seem to really relate to people's well-being, and then think about ways we can get that, not just from 2 best friends, but from other groups, right? Other groups that we may have less of a time and intensity in. And when you look at it that way, things start to open up differently, right? And so I can give you a sense of when I looked at the positive influences, for example, in my life, one of my greatest sources of purpose in my life is this, 23-year-old young woman named Rachel. It happens to be my daughter, and we're having a dinner in Cambridge, in this. And so Rachel, on a daily basis, is a major source of inspiration and perspective for me, right? She was a top 50 tennis player in the US and had the sport taken away from her first year of college due to an injury, and she pivoted into medicine. Just a really, inspirational thing for somebody whose identity had been built around a sport in so many different ways. She's a sounding board, for me to live more intentionally and not just get caught up in what society says is good. Daily source of laughter, right? She calls me Baldy, for example, and all her friends call me Baldy, and she thinks it's funny. I don't think it's as funny, but we joke constantly, right? Even to this point in time. And so, as I looked at the interactions that happened between us and the source of purpose, it was really clear, not just that she's my daughter, but it was the kind of interactions that we're having, right? That we're creating this strong sense of purpose. Now, in stark contrast, if I look at one of my greatest microstressors, right? And somebody that's creating stress in small moments for me, that's, a major source of stress as a product of these small moments. Let me introduce you to this person. And you may recognize her because it turns out to be the exact same human being out there, right? And on a daily basis, Rachel is a constant source of worry about her future. Not fight or flight worry, right? Not cortisol level worry, but just, are things working out okay? Is she going to get into med school? Is she going to get a residency, and coming up? She's a time drain, as most, parents experience with children. It's what society's done to us. A lot of the people in my interviews would describe parent homework, where kids in 4th and 5th grade would get sent home with projects that there's no feasible way an 8-year-old is going to do without a weekend of help from the parents. Right. And you see that doesn't go away in the 20s, right? It becomes issues around insurance or other things like that. And she's a source of secondary stress, right? That when she gets stressed, she will pass it on to me. And I'll give you a very specific example of this. Rachel, again, was a high-end tennis player. I knew nothing about the sport. I would run around the country with her trying to support her and whatever she was doing. And what happened is, over time, in that she got used to just telling me anytime anything was going wrong, right? It was usually just the two of us, these tournaments, because we were coming from a small town, not a big academy. And so it'd be, Baldy, this has happened, or Baldy, this person cheated, or Baldy, I'm not getting this. And the problem with that is that behavior that made sense at that point in time, we let persist until she's 23 years old. Right. And so I'd get texts 2, 3, 4 times a week. And many of you might either do this or receive them. And, what we discovered over this glass of wine in this pizza joint in Cambridge was that she sends me these texts, pretty much a couple times a week about something that, that's annoying her. And she doesn't think about it for 5 seconds after that. Right. She sends these texts. It's a knee-jerk reaction. I, on the other hand, worry about it for 3 or 4 hours. Right. Or kind of another chance to connect with her. Not high grade worry, but just in the back of my mind, along with everything else. And so we laughed about it. And I said, well, Squirt, if this doesn't matter to you, don't pass it to me. Right. And my life has gotten qualitatively different, right? Since I'm not getting hit with 3 or 4 of these a week without me even realizing the impact that they were having on me. And the reality is, when something does matter, she does pass it on. I said, I want to know immediately when something's significant, but if it's not stressing you out, there's no way to pass it to me because it's asymmetrical, right, in this. So if you take that idea of what I'm saying, the relationship has actually gotten better as a product of thinking about how do we shift the interactions within it just a little bit, right? And too often when we see people that are stressing us out, we focus on the relationship. So many therapeutic models focus on boundaries, right? When in fact, we actually need the relationships in other ways as well. And so as we were going through this, that's kind of how we focus, right? Is what are the positive interactions that we can reasonably assume are going to be related to well-being, right? And we really focused, there's tons of models on well-being. We didn't look at financial well-being and a couple of other elements. We focused on things that connections would likely have an impact on. And it came down to physical health and people that situated activities to take care of themselves in groups of other people. They persist longer. It creates dimensionality in their life. We focused on growth inside and outside of their profession, purpose, how we experience a sense of purpose, not just as a product of the mission and the work we're doing, but as a product of the way we're interacting with others inside and outside of work. And then resilience. So resilience is an example for me of, we are conditioned in many ways to think that we own resilience, right? We have grit, we have fortitude, we lean in. But if you ask 600 people how they got through difficult stretches in their lives and not focus on what they did to get through, but how they fell back on others, you see 8 really predictable things we get from others that create resilience if we built the connections and if we know how to use them, right, in the right way. And so that's what we're focusing on. And the thing that surprised me, literally in my very first interview, I was talking to somebody that described really changing her life from being, a very sedentary person all her life up to her late 30s, life science executive, wildly successful, right, professionally, but her doctor gave her a very stern warning, late 30s, and she, began to walk and then run and then, move to a point where she was running marathons with groups of people before she would go on vacations. So there's a fantastic transformation in her life, and it had everything to do with the group that she was a part of, right, that was running with her. Running as an identity helped her push back on work, but it was all the interaction she was having with people that weren't life science executives, right? There were auto mechanics, cardiologists, male people that created perspective and dimensionality in her life. And so this very first interview, 45 minutes in, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I get 599 more of these, this is a New York Times bestseller. I mean, it's fantastic. We're laughing, everything else. And I stopped about 45 minutes in it because it hit me. I was like, how did you get in trouble? Right. So I'm talking to this woman. She's brilliant, right? Wildly successful, funny, charismatic, obviously cares about things. And I'm going, how did you get stuck? Right? How did you get to a point that a doctor had to say, you have to do something or you're not going to be here, right? For your kids. And this interview that was going 100 miles a minute went to nothing. And she was looking at me and she said, well, I don't really know. Right. And we dug into that, right, to see what are the small moments of stress that were accruing around her every day. And I did that for 599 more interviews. And the interesting thing to me that I was hearing was it was never the big things that was killing people. Generally it was these small moments that were coming at us through connections in our lives that was creating stress. And so Karen and I started to call this microstress, right? Just routine interactions that create a moment of stress that for any successful person, you're taught not to even think about, right? You just go through it, you get through it. Neurologically, Karen looked a lot more into this than I did, but a lot of the results showed that you don't even register the stress, right? It doesn't invoke fight or flight responses in the same way that a toxic boss does. And then the fact that these stresses are coming at us, not just through people that we don't like, right? What we conventionally think about from a stress standpoint is people we're frustrated with, but also people we love, right? My interactions with Rachel were causing me a lot of stress, low-grade stress. Obviously somebody I love and care dearly about. And it's because of the hyper-connected way that we live today. It's not the individual isolated moment. Every one of these individually don't look like a big deal. It's the accumulation, right, of them over time that hit us. And we could see they fell into kind of three categories, 14 of these microstresses into three categories. There was a set of interactions that tended to hurt us because they drained our personal capacity, our ability to get done what we needed to get done in that day. And it could take the form of dealing with boss changing strategic direction on a project you're working on and doing it over a curt email, right? So suddenly you've got to redirect, maybe you have to redirect your team. And at the same time, you're wondering, gosh, what did that email mean? What did he or she mean in the way that she sent that? Maybe jumping between back-to-back 30-minute meetings. Pre-pandemic, everybody would complain about having 8 one-hour meetings. Now everybody's complaining because somebody came up with a great idea of let's go to 30 minutes. Most people are complaining about having 16 30-minute meetings, right? And we're more stressed because of it. We're more intense in them. We're moving across them, which creates switching costs more cognitively. We end the day with a to-do list based on 16 meetings, not 8, right? There's a reason that people are burning out. Maybe it's 2 hours in email, right? Because people fight out what they want. Not that academics would ever do this, but they create 20-paragraph emails where they hide what they want in the 19th and throw some zingers in 10 and 12. Maybe sorting out confusion of roles on a new project and just checking in if you're in the sandwich generation on an ill parent, right, as a part-time caregiver and all because of something that popped up through the day. So all these in isolation are not big deals, right? But in aggregate, they have an impact in hurting people's ability to get done what they need to get done. Then there's another set that really affected us in the sense of kind of draining people's energy, right, or emotional reserves for what they needed to do. And so that would oftentimes maybe take the form of conflict with a misaligned colleague, right? As so much work has moved into agile and cross-functional teams, it's created conditions where people agree in a room and then they go off and pull in different directions. And it creates a lot of consternation for people to think about, how do I solve that? Maybe having to deliver negative feedback to an employee and wondering, how am I going to do this, right? And keep their engagement, maybe holding space for another employee, right, to work through a difficult time and being empathetic, right, in that moment. And maybe it be trying to be present, right? The expectations you place on yourself as a parent to be present for children at dinner, and maybe you just miss it by half an hour, because work took over, and you're dealing with secondhand stress from an irritated partner, right, in different ways. So sets of things that just kind of hit us emotionally right through the day. And then there's another set that were more subtle, but they led people into what I call echo chambers an awful lot. I mean, just subtle kind of pushes to do and be somebody that was not who they signed up to be early in life. And so it may be getting messages from leadership with aggressive revenue or cost targets that's pushing them to oversell or manage people or projects in ways that they don't feel great about. Or maybe you're slight by a competitive peer that undermines self-worth. Or maybe, again, societal expectations, right? What it means to be a good parent, a good friend, a good child, a good sibling. All those create senses of guilt, right? If you've missed your child's bedtime because of work demands around you. So, none of these in isolation are a big deal, but many of you on this call would probably say, holy cow, that looks like Tuesday of this week, right? Or some variant of it. And again, what we can see is in isolation, none of these are big deals, right? They're things that you kind of work through. The problem is with the velocity and the pace that they're coming at us. And it does have an effect, right, on us. So saying neurologically, what we were seeing and talking to a lot of neuroscientists on this is not my field, I'm the network guy, but that what a lot of people were saying is that these stresses, they're like wind on a mountain, right? They slowly erode over time, or they're like kids jumping on a bed. The bed sustains 4 and then 7, and then number 8 gets on, and there it goes. And what a lot of the studies showed is that the body registers the stress even if the mind doesn't, right? So there were, things around heart rate, around metabolic changes. Even one study that was done by a fantastic professor at Northeastern showed that she created 2 conditions where in one condition, each condition ate the same meal, right? The same caloric intake. But under one condition, they had been under this form of social stress within 2 hours of eating the meal. In the other condition, they hadn't, right? And the condition that was under this form of social stress, she found added 104 calories to that meal because of the stress response, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but you take that out over a year and it was 11 pounds, right, in her study. And so where we focused on this is it's easy for people to, look at this and say, well, this is just life, right? This is a sea of stress that I'm in. There's nothing that I can do about it. When in fact, I actually think there is. One of the things in my world that I always marvel at is we have never had the ability to shape what we do and who we do it with more than today. We don't worry about the weather to eat or when it's raining to go out and work or not. Yet we give it up a lot, right? We fall into patterns of other people's expectations. And so what we focused on are different ways of making these ideas actionable. So I built an app that I have up on Apple. You can download it for free. It's called the Microstress Effect app. It helps you walk through these microstressors. There's videos with them. There's examples of what people do. Or this is a real simple tool, right, that you can pop off the Harvard it's book 1. It was one of the big ideas for 2023. And so they produced a lot of content on it. But they have a table like this. Very easy thing for people to go through and say, okay, here are the microstresses on the left. Here are the common sources of these microstresses. And a lot of people will say, well, I don't see myself in there. I'm my biggest source of microstress. And you can add yourself if you want, but we were just looking at mainly relationships. And do 3 passes at it, right? Go through first and say, where are 2, 3, or 4 of these impacting me that are systemic enough that I should do something about it, right? I've just fallen into patterns of being used to doing something. And that's, really worth it. Right. Again, we go back to those ratios in the beginning. Typically, social psychology would show that negative interactions have 3 to 5 times the impact of positive. Right. And so if our focus on trying to be happier is just coming by adding things to our lives, then and not taking away the negatives in this way, we're leaving some high impact stuff right on the table. Then I'll have people go through and say, okay, where are you unnecessarily creating stress? Right, in moments. And, this matters for a bunch of reasons, but the biggest of which is I could see that when people unnecessarily created stress for others around them, it almost always boomeranged back to them in a different form. Right. So maybe they, gave an employee, one thing too many. This employee that always comes through and they're used to just passing the stress on to them. And then suddenly that person backs away, or in many cases actually quits, or maybe they push a child on one thing that just doesn't matter in the scope of life, but they start to, again, back away, be belligerent, whatever it may be. And then the third pass through is I have people think about where are you down in the weeds, right? You're just magnifying a situation in ways that isn't really needed, right? If you back off of it, you take a little perspective in the situation, you'll find that it's not as big a deal as you think, right? And this to me was one of the tricks of what I called my 10 percenters in the book, right? We would go through these interviews. 90% of the time they started, 10 minutes, rainbows and lollipops, everybody's happy, everything's great. And then the stress started to build as we went. But about 10% never went down, right? They were doing things differently that seemed to help them cope with the stress. And one of those things was that they had a greater tendency to live values they wanted to experience, right? And they tended to create dimensionality in their life. A very common hallmark for the happier people is that they tended to have at least 2 and usually 3 groups they were an authentic part of outside of their profession and direct family, right? And those, what I'll call dimensionality in their life, created perspective and gave them different ways of thinking about what really matters. The stories that ended poorly were almost always those where people became completely unidimensional, right, in their profession and the provider role for direct family. And then they tended to use the small moments better in really interesting ways. They weren't typically defined. They may do this, they may sail the ocean, they may hike the Himalayas, but that wasn't typically what was making them happier. What tended to be, at least in their words, making them happier was living the small moments more authentically with others. And so in the back half of the book, we talk a lot about, the ways interactions were helping people from a physical health standpoint, a resilience standpoint, and how they experience purpose, right, in their lives. And so another very easy tool that we'll use with people is when I walk through these interviews and I would ask people to tell me about times in their lives when they were just highly engaged, right? They just were thriving in their life, and not what they were doing, but what was the role of the interactions around them that was creating that engagement. You could categorize their responses into the 4 spheres on the right that had to do with interactions at work that were creating a great sense of meaning. And then the 4 spheres on the left is interactions outside of work, right, that tended to create a sense of meaning. The spiritual bubble down there, that should really be more aesthetic, right? It could be religion, but it could also be poetry, music, art, a lot of different forms. But interactions that just pulled you into groups that kind of stimulated different thought about the value of different things. And there's a bunch of different ways people will use this. So I'll kind of end with one of my favorite interviews. Was a very successful Silicon Valley executive, right? She managed the venture fund for one of the biggest and most successful software companies out there, right? Come out of Stanford. She'd been a runner all her life. And she, when I sat down to interview her, she, was about mid-40s, something like that. And she said, "You know what, Rob, for the first 20 years out of college, I let society tell me what running was good for. And that was a huge mistake." Right. And it was a really provocative thought to hear somebody say that. And so I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, when I got out of school, I kept running because that was my identity and it helped me, manage work stress and things. But what happened is if I didn't get a personal best time on the races I was running every year in one of them, it was a bad year for running." Right. And you sit back and intuitively, that's not a good strategy, right? You're going to get older. Not only do professional responsibilities kick up, but personal ones do. And it makes it really hard to do that. But the crazy thing is this wildly successful, funny, charismatic, woman was living her life that way. Right? She was getting up earlier each day to stretch, to do yoga, to do weight training, all the things that would not let her go quietly. And she woke up one day and said, "This is somebody else's idea of fun, right? Those things are actually pulling me out of relationships that I really value." And she said, "I really want to be running with my daughter, her best friend, and a parent." Right. And they started running, and it evolved to this community of children and parents that were using running as a way to stay healthy. Right. And she said, "I've never been happier with it." And so you see from a principle standpoint, what she was doing, what I see works for other people is she wasn't saying, "I'm going to go, hike the Himalayas or write a concerto or run a marathon." What she was saying is, how do I just pivot what I'm already doing in my life in a way that'll pull me more authentically into connections that I care about? Right? And that can happen outside of work, like in her story, or it can be, the way that we think about running projects in different ways. However you do it, the one idea I'd leave with people is you need to have typically at least 2 and usually 3 groups outside of your profession. It's one of the things that creates perspective. They don't have to be big groups, not extroverted activities, but you need that to create dimensionality, right, in life. And so if you've fallen out of those groups, right, what we experience right now with COVID is that we've had a legitimate rise in this form of stress, not just through COVID, but about 12 years ago. So stress is up. But what COVID did is it actually pulled us out of those groups that were keeping us whole, right? The social distancing kind of pulled us out of the book clubs, the music events, the running groups. And so that's happened. One easy strategy is to reflect back to a passion from the past, right? And use that to slingshot into a new group. So my final interview, story I'll tell you about, was actually from New York. It was a head of neuroscience at one of the big hospitals there. I won't narrow it down any further than that, but somebody that was very austere, brilliant, scientist, and obviously super, super smart, right? Put together. And he did an interview with me, and then we ran a program around this work with him. And I never heard from him again right after that for about 4 or 5 months. And then I got an email out of the blue, and the email, the subject line said, "Rob, I've joined a rock band." And I burst out laughing because the discontinuity between who he was and how he presented and joining a rock band was hysterical. But what had happened is he said he thought a lot about this, and he'd gotten really locked in to his whole life was about advancing his practice and profession and family, right? Being a provider for family. And he said he needed to get dimensionality in it. And so he used to play music when he was in college. So he went to a music store and picked out a guitar. And as he was walking out, he passed by a flyer that said, "We're looking for a musician, right? Or a guitar player. What we lack in quality, we make up for in volume," or something like that. And he joined the band. And he was writing me after this saying, "This was the best decision I've made in probably 20 years. I'm hanging out with 20-year-olds. They're never going to be my best friends, right? It's not the 200-hour friend that was making the difference, but it is separating me from my work. It's creating space for me that I regroup in. And I'm learning to care about different things in life, right? From the perspectives that are being brought around me." And so you see, from a principle standpoint, I'm not saying go join a rock band, but what I am saying is almost all of us have that ability to grab passions from a past and use that to slingshot forward into new groups. So with that, I will stop. I'm a little bit over time, maybe 3 minutes over what I'd hoped for here, but we'll be happy to answer questions.
Excellent.
Whatever.
Thank you so much. Very thought provocative. Great response I'm seeing on the question side. Rob, I will start out with a couple of questions that came through from the audience. One from Melissa Fisher, who is a faculty member with us, and her question is, if you break down your findings and analysis by gender, race, class, and so on, to see how this plays out in different groups.
Yeah, and it's a great question, right? We're starting with me with work like this. A lot of times what I'm doing is using the qualitative to then design further quantitative, right? You start isolating out what the stressors are and then deploying that. And so we have a lot of work going on that front. And the other front I have a lot going on are these action learning experiments in organizations to see what does it take to take action on this. And so I'd like to come back to that because it's been really eye-opening for me, on that front. But so the first pass we've done at this is I put this Microstress Effect app out there, and we collect data in the app on who's completing it, which stressors they pick, things like that, right? And so in mining that, there's some definite implications. You see that almost across the board, women experience this more than men. As an example, you see that the conventional markers of success actually come at a cost of all these microstresses, so education level, et cetera. And so that'll be a piece that I'm doing for HBR pretty soon on that. Is just looking at some of the nuance. But it's a great question. One of my I did a session for a bunch of CFOs, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks back, and one of the rough CFOs came up to me afterwards and he said, "This is great, but I don't think the younger generation has any stress." I looked at him like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, they don't care about work. They don't work hard." And I was like, "Oh, maybe," and I actually admire that. They keep it in a little better perspective than we do. But I said, what they do have that we never had is all the social comparison, right? That goes on through the social media. And it took him a while, and he nodded his head and kind of walked off. But I think we're seeing a lot of that too, as generational things that are different in different ways.
Yeah, excellent. Another question came from one of our students. will you consider it counterproductive to try and identify the sources of microstress instead of suppressing them, as it might become, you might become too tuned into your microstresses, and that can stress you out.
Yeah, it's that ties exactly into what, I'm kind of uncovering with this. So I'll give you my opinion on it, and there could be 1,000 others, but I think the answer is no. I think what happens with these things is, I think day to day, it is easier not to deal with them, but they accumulate on us, just like we get heavier as we get older. Weight creeps up on us. I think the same thing happens with this stuff. And it was so clearly obvious to me in these experiments we're doing where, people will use the app, they'll isolate a microstress, and then they'll write me an email. So it's completely unscalable. Groups of 40 writing me an email Monday morning and saying, here's the one that I'm going to go focus on and what I'm going to do. And I'll write them back, right? And say, here's a couple of thoughts. And then on Friday, they'll say, here's what I did, right? And kind of give me feedback that way. And it's helping me understand the degree to exactly what the student is saying is the stress that people feel, right? And actually dealing with it it's just easier psychically to not deal with it, right, in the moment, but it accumulates on us. And conversely, what I see is when people did take that action in 2 or 3 times over a couple of weeks, and they learned that, oh my God, the world didn't tilt on its axis and things are actually better, the confidence actually bloomed. But it required me in many instances to be there and be a source of confidence, right, or a source of perspective. So I'm learning a lot about, if you're really trying to drive change in an organization, there are very specific things we can do to situate the idea in the set of interactions. And I won't bore you all with more on that, but we can do a lot to kind of architect it in a way that takes that fear down, makes the conversations more neutral, to take action on it.
Excellent. One question I had, Rob, given the examples from your interviews that you shared, is that something that could be a de-stressor for one individual or particular context could be a stressful situation for another. And that is yoga, meditation. You mentioned that particular female executive from Silicon Valley who took what we consider to be de-stressors and turned them into a very stressful, competitive type of activities. So what have you noticed about this sort of dual approach, or one situation per itself might not be stressful, but different people experience it differently?
Yeah, it's, so much of, I'll give you, and this is my experience in 26 years of having a consortium, trying to see what it takes to get action on ideas, right? So most of the people on this call are going to be trained in scientific methods where you're trying to find what's the biggest beta weight, right? That's the thing we're going to go focus on. And I think it's a mistake, or just HBR wants that too, right? What's the one thing, every audience I'm in front of, that's it, right? What's the one thing that if everybody does is going to have the greatest impact? I don't think that's this game. I think if you look at that table and what I'm doing there, everybody has a different set. Or if I actually if I share these microstresses, and because of the success of this book, I'll be in, virtual audiences with 5,000 people, right? And I'll say, which ones do you experience, right? And it's almost an even distribution, right? And then I'll say, which ones are you causing? And it's almost an even distribution. So, my belief is you have to design things that get down to the context people are in, and then help them see what they can do right off of that context. I don't think you can say, I can certainly say some things that are universal. So the biggest microstress, that we're seeing from the ones pulled from the app is that 60% of the people that have done this thing, we've had hundreds of thousands go through it, 60% pick draining interactions with family and friends as the first microstress, right? And that's kind of funny, right? Because that's supposed to be the antidote to it, but it's also, a form of stress. So to me, that's again, the value of coming in saying, oh, I'm not going to dump my family and friends, but I can get more precise on what are the interactions that are happening, right? And if we can kind of, architect that a little bit differently, it can have impact. So that's where I've come down, right, over many, many years of this stuff, that I think that's a more, it's not the scientific answer. People always want the biggest beta weight, but it's the answer that drives more effective action. I can see in a lot of cases.
And how do you see, what you've put out there and kind of enlighten the audiences about this particular factor in their lives? How do you see them taking actions in the context of their own, specific environments that would help them with this knowledge in mind?
So, I mean, kind of to the student's point earlier, I do this. I did a leadership program this morning. I was porting into a group of 100, very senior executives, and everybody's eating it up, right? They're going through the table. They're, here's what, we're struggling with. And then I'll go to this next idea of have at least 2 and usually 3 groups are an authentic part of. And then we'll popcorn around the room and say, well, what are you taking action on? And 95% of the time, everybody's saying, I need a new best friend, right? They're leaning to the positive and they're not adapting the negative, right? And so that's kind of where I'm running these experiments to say, what does it take to get people to think about how do I take the negative out of the interactions? Because it's either what that student said, that psychically it's just more than I want to deal with, or it's that they don't feel equipped, or they feel like, gosh, if I touch the relationship in any way, it's going to affect the whole relationship. There's a lot of reasons for that, but to me, it's a super important thing. Where you go back to that basic idea that the negatives always have more impact than the positives, right? And so if you're not doing something on that side, you're leaving the high leverage things on the table, And so that's what I'm seeing so far, and where I'm trying to figure out how to help people take better action.
Interesting. Another question from a student. How do you see the differences between corporate cultures? Do you see a dependency or correlation between the company management style overall? And we know some of the usual suspects in this context, and the levels of microstress of the employees of those companies.
Yeah. So absolutely, right. There are, you go to Wall Street where you guys are, and I mean, most of them will say my work is devoid of purpose. They'll admit it. They don't have, some of the counterbalancing forces that make, work, pushing through. Like if you're Moderna, right, it's different, right? You're doing something that's having a quantifiable impact. So you definitely have places like that. And I would put, investment banks, I would put big law, I would put consulting firms. My gosh, the triple matrices that they tend to be operating under have made those worlds, no human being feasibly can do the jobs that are being pushed at them. And people are making decisions on which balls to drop, not where to excel in different ways. So, and so it's not just culture, sometimes it's design, it's the leverage models, it's all sorts of stuff, right, that have an impact. What might surprise you is the degree to which I saw the same problem in these cultures that were very highly purpose fueled, right? And so you take my neurosurgeon as an example, right? That is somebody that's impacting the world. And they have the same tendency to start giving up everything in their life in the pursuit of their profession, right? Or being recognized in their field. And I saw it in a bunch of different ways. I won't mention the organizations, but there were some that were incredibly, number 3 greatest place to work, right? Incredibly positive, but it created, a very unidimensional life for these people. And they would get pulled in ways that hurt. And so that was intriguing to me. Like your mind goes immediately to the toxic cultures or to the other places, but we found it would also be seductive in these places that were kind of, what many would consider highly purpose-driven too.
There's one comment that came in, and that will be probably one of the last. An extensive, actually, commentary here from Chin that even quotes specific page numbers from your book. So I appreciate it. If you remember,
don't ask me what I.
If you remember on what you said on page 117, could you please? But it is about the demand of particular roles we play at work and at home. And the comment goes, at work we have the expectation on pursuing business objectives, while at home we have these unrealistic expectations from our partners and siblings and children that may end up
and
having.
It's an interesting question, right? Are they from those people, or do we allow that to happen? right,
Exactly.
on ourselves? I think
Exactly.
that's a fascinating question to unfold and think about. I think it's without getting myself in trouble, and I don't have a lot of empirical evidence on it, but there's a gender difference there, right?
Yeah.
And there's a real difference. That there are societal expectations that are fundamentally different that create these micro stresses. But there's also, I can see in my prior work, a much greater desire to help, amongst women than men, if I
Yeah.
look at beyond collaboration overload. And so some of it's an interesting question of where it comes from. You know what I mean? And what do you do about it? And again, I'm super cognizant that I'm a middle-aged bald man saying that, but I can see it in the empirical data, that women are absorbing more stress. They're more likely to offer to help, right? And so some of it's coming from that desire to help, desire to be nurturing, and then some of it's coming from societal expectations, right? That kind of place things on people. And I do think I love the point about those outside of work roles. I don't think we think about that enough. And it's not just gender specific there. Everybody puts so much pressure on themselves to be a good provider, to be a good parent, to be a good child. The guilt and the way it mounts is unbelievable, and a lot of the people I was interviewing too.
And maybe again, the final, we can't let you go, Rob, globally, because our audience is very global here. Have you looked at the differences between cultures, where how these microstresses, again, we talked about in general societal expectations, right? They could be different in different cultures. But
Right.
have you factored in that global diversity into your research?
To some degree in the sampling, when I would go to each of these places. Now, with anything qualitative, it's hard to get, full representation. You're doing 90-minute interviews with 600 people. That is that's a big study by most people's standards. Now we would split it by gender and then try to get by level, as much as possible, and try to get international representation. But I can't say that I could say, gosh, Asia is struggling with this form of stress more than the US. But that is, a lot of times for me right now, I was trying to articulate the forms of the stress, and we're pushing this more into surveys and other things like that as we go. So I hope we're just starting a survey with I don't think I can say it, but it'll be a global survey, particularly looking at Asia as one example on this.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there to see what the cross-cultural differences are.
Yeah.
And you just landed where I wanted us to end, and that is what's next? Because
Well,
we are expecting
yeah.
you back with the
Yeah.
next round of research.
I think
So
I'm going to
share
be
with us.
retired and fishing pretty soon, but with these ideas, it's a little bit of what I've already mentioned twice, right? We'll start getting what I would like to see. Number one is more empirical understanding, right, of the nuance and things like that. But number two, and the reason I'm investing so much time and effort in what it takes to actually get action on these ideas is because I believe if we use my network analytics, we can start to be much more precise on where we intervene and push some of these nudges into and behavioral changes, and then start conversations, with the leader, then down into the team in ways that could drive cultural change. Right, that's my belief and aspiration in this. And so where I would like to see that work going is I believe that, legitimately, if people did some of this better, you'd have less attrition, you'd have less burnout, you may have less people going into clinical categories of care. And, I'd like to be able to start showing those kind of links, over time. The next book, I think, as I mentioned to you in the very beginning, is really taking ideas from the last two books that focused on individuals and high performance and well-being, and we're really elevating it up to look at teams differently, right? And say, how do you look at the way teams need to work together with this lens going forward?
Excellent. We'll definitely look out for that and your publications in Harvard Business Review and Sloan Management. And we will be, we want to finish on, yes, thank you, Renee, on our next sessions. On October 3rd, we hope everyone returns for Alex Alonso, Chief Knowledge Officer from SHRM, who is going to speak on the topic of his new book, October 24th. Same thing, new book by Dan Fisher and Steve Garcia on leadership. And then we're going to have November 9th, Rajama Krishnamurthy, who is the Director of Leadership Enterprise and AI Strategy at Microsoft, who's going to share with us what's happening in the AI space. But on this note, I want to, and all of the recordings and references to the app that Rob mentioned here, and all the resources that Rob provided, including the slides, will be shared with the participants. Thank you all so much, and especially to Rob. And we certainly hope that you're not going to retire too soon. We want you back.
Well, thank you all very much. Have a
Okay.
great day.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.